Shalom, welcome to Judaism Today, a television series produced under the auspices of the New Jersey region of the United Synagogue of America. I'm Jack Weinshanker. With this series, we plan to bring you personalities who are involved in the conservative movement, who in their daily lives play leadership roles in the Jewish community, both in New Jersey and internationally. Our series is dedicated to the hope that understanding will promote goodwill. We believe that Judaism teaches us to work in behalf of promoting goodwill among all people, so we might hasten the fulfillment of our ancient messianic dream.
Welcome to a special presentation of Judaism Today, one of the most exciting things that we've been doing in our series with the cooperation of the people at Suburban Cablevision on very short notice, gave us the opportunity to put on this special presentation on a most timely and important subject. We have as our guests today two people who have recently come back from a trip to Ethiopia, a humanitarian mission, if you will. It's not the kind of thing that a person does to go on a tour. It's the kind of thing that a person does when they're committed to humanitarian needs of other people. Dave and Elaine Ravich have recently returned from such a trip. Most people, I think, are aware of what the news has been telling us about the circumstances in Ethiopia. These two people have spent much of their lives devoted to humanitarian efforts. Give you just a little bit of background about the people that we have as our guests. Elaine is the national chairman of a committee dealing with publications for the Women's League. She is also the president of the Women's Division of the Jewish Federation of Central New Jersey. Also, as a matter of fact, is a past president of Temple Beth Or and Clark, which happens to be a role that I also had at one time. Dave Ravich is on the national board of the Conference on Soviet Jewry, on the national board of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, better known as AIPAC, chairman of the Jewish Community Endowment Foundation of Central New Jersey, and also is an attorney, when he has the time, with offices in Rahway, East Orange, Atlantic City, and Dave and Elaine live in Clark. First, let me welcome you to this program, and thank you very much for coming on. It's something that I think will be a real value to the Jewish community and the community at large to hear of your experiences of the kind of trip that you took. First, let me, how does someone get the idea to go to a place like Ethiopia, especially with the things that are going on there now?
We have been active in the activist movement in the Soviet Union, being active with the Conference on Soviet Jewry. We had traveled to the Soviet Union several years ago to meet with some of the activists, and we became involved in human rights at that time. About 2 or 3 years ago, I had occasion to be at a lecture where one of the Ethiopian Jews who had left Ethiopia for Israel was speaking, and it whetted our interest in the situation involving the Ethiopian Jews, which became very critical recently with the famines and the problems that have arisen in Ethiopia. So the opportunity came to join a group of about 15 or 16 people under the auspices of NACRAC, the National Jewish Community Relations Council, and that's how we happened to be there.
What kind of group did you go with? How large was the group? What were the structure of that group? What kinds of people went with you?
There were, as I say, 15 or 16 people from various parts of the United States and Canada. The international chairman of B'nai B'rith was one of the group. The head of the Jewish professional community in Canada was a member of the group. There were people from California, people who had a community of interest in the situation of the Ethiopian Jews.
Could you tell us a little bit about the trip itself, physically? How did you get there? What travel arrangements? How did that work out?
We flew to Paris, where we had a briefing at the Office of the Jewish Agency, which was quite an experience because of the security precautions taken in Paris. The street has ash cans filled with concrete in front of the building, no parking on the street, armed guards in front of the building, and a safety chamber when you walk in. From Paris, we flew to Cairo, waited several hours in the airport, and then went, stopping at Khartoum in Sudan, and then into Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia. We stayed in Addis for one night, and then we went to the province and the major town of Gondar, which is northwest of Addis and is the area where most of the Jewish villages today are located.
In terms of the airlines that you were using, what were the kinds of airlines that you were using?
Well,
How did you get around?
We flew Air France to Paris and Cairo, and then Ethiopian Airlines was our mode of travel from Cairo and in Ethiopia itself.
I understand that you did bring some things with you. What were the kinds of things that you brought with you? What was the purpose of bringing some of those things? What were you trying to accomplish with that? Obviously, with a small group, you can't carry out a relief mission as such. But what were some of the things that you did bring?
We were. It was suggested that if we could bring vitamins, calcium tablets, and pens for the children in school, it would be great. And I spoke to people in local industry, Beecham, for example, and that was told I could take as many vitamins and calcium as I could carry, which came to about 10 boxes of 50 pounds each. So we had about 500 pounds worth of vitamins and calcium and the fountain pens. The airlines were great, no charge for excess baggage. As much as we could put on, they would take. We eventually started to distribute them in Ethiopia. We had gone to one of the Jewish villages, Ambovar, and they had a clinic there, and we attempted to distribute the vitamins and the minerals at the clinic, and we were stopped by an Ethiopian soldier, a member of the government who was accompanying us wherever we went, and we were told that we could not leave the items there. And he suggested that we go to another clinic down the road that was handling the general population and not just the Jewish village. And anyhow, after a series of negotiations, we worked out a compromise where half of what we brought was left in Ambovar, and the other half was taken to another clinic down the road. The pens we gave out to the school children in many of the villages, and it was really amazing. We couldn't have brought them a better gift. They were screaming and scrambling for the pens because this was something that they needed for their lessons, for their work, and there just weren't any in the villages.
Who runs that clinic? How is that clinic set up?
The clinic is run by the people. There is not a doctor, a medic, you might call him, somebody who is able to handle first aid, working the clinic. And the clinic is really just it's built like a garage. It's a one-room building with 1 or 2 beds to service several hundred people in a community, and ill-equipped to do anything except the most rudimentary first aid.
So it's run by the people in the village themselves?
That's correct.
How were you treated by the government officials? You mentioned that you had someone from the government going with you, but how were you treated in general by the government officials?
They were very accommodating for the most part. For an American in Ethiopia to go any place, he must first get special permission to go to any particular village. And even if there is another village a quarter of a mile away, if you don't have permission, you cannot go to that village. No matter where you go, you are accompanied by a representative of the government. So that the 15 or 16 of us were always in the presence of an Ethiopian government official, and the only time we were able to not be in direct contact with them was when we would visit a village, and half of us would go to one end and half go to the other end, and he couldn't be in 2 places at the same time. And that was really pretty much how they controlled where we went. As a matter of fact, we wanted to go to one of the feeding stations in the famine area, and although we had managed to arrange transportation on a private plane to get there, we were not given government clearance, and we just could not go.
How was the general attitude of the government officials? Were they friendly? Were they suspicious? Were they discourteous? How did they treat you, pretty much?
They were very courteous to us. They are somewhat upset at the idea of the Ethiopian Jews wanting to go to Israel, because they feel that their Marxist country is heaven for everybody, and that it's disloyal for a loyal Ethiopian subject to want to leave the country. It's a similar attitude that we find in the government of Russia in not permitting anybody to leave.
Much of what we see in the media about the general situation in Ethiopia with the famine and the refugees by the hundreds of thousands, if not more, is very common knowledge right now. Did you get to see any of that?
Well, we mainly stayed in the province of Gondar, which is a little south of the Tigray, where the bulk of the famine is taking place. However, even in Gondar, where the famine has not yet hit, the drought has hit. The land is creviced and cracked. It looks like an earthquake had been through there, and it's only a question of 6 months until the famine reaches that area. We had meetings, and we were briefed by Monsignor Cole, who was head of Catholic Charities. We were briefed by the U.S. Chargé d'Affaires, David Korn. We were briefed by the head of aid, the American Aid Group, and by the Red Cross, and everybody. And the story was the same from all of them, that in 1985, there are approximately 7 to 8 million people in jeopardy of dying unless aid is gotten. And this is a figure that everybody agrees upon, and it's a situation that not only encompasses Ethiopia, but the neighboring sub-Saharan lands also, next to Ethiopia, Chad and many others.
Is it possible to speak in terms of a bottom line as to why? You know, what is really behind? What happened that has caused this situation?
This country, Ethiopia, this area of the world, are not strangers to drought and famine. It happens. However, preparations for this just don't appear to be taken. There seems to be no irrigation, major irrigation system throughout the country. There seems to be no reservoirs throughout the country. The people in the camps, from what we've heard from people who were in the camps, people were quiet and just waiting for the end to come. They weren't rioting, they weren't storming the places, the warehouses. They were just sitting there in silence, even the children, waiting for the death to come. It seems to be a part of their history, and a terrible part of their history. The revolution that overthrew Haile Selassie, I believe was in 1973, and the 10-year anniversary of the revolution was celebrated by a government spending of $100 million for stadium and refurbishing the country, just to show what a great place it was in honor of the revolution, instead of taking that money and building projects that would enable the people to get through this difficult period.
I recall reading one story about a boatload of scotch that the government had ordered to support their celebration of their 10th anniversary.
It's quite possible.
You saying then that really that had there been, or if there could still be, adequate planning by the government, that the extent of this disaster could be reduced significantly?
Well, from what the people in the aid program say, it might be too late for that, for this current group of people, that the famine is so widespread that unless there's a massive infusion of food, we're going to have this holocaust. However, planning, long-range planning should now be started to avoid this in the future. But they have another difficult problem. Ethiopia is currently fighting a war on 3 fronts with separatist movements. In the east, you have Somalia and the Agadan. In the north, you have the Tigray, and in the northwest, you have Eritrea. And the bulk of the famine is in the Tigray area. which is just south of the Sudan. And the question is, does the government want to feed the revolutionaries who are now in the midst of the famine, which is one problem. You also have a situation where maybe 700,000 or 800,000 Ethiopians have walked out of Ethiopia north into the Sudan and are now presently in refugee camps in the Sudan. Some of these people have walked as far as 100 miles through the battlefields of the Tigray, through the famine area, into the Sudan. And this is causing another problem.
Could you briefly tell us a little bit of how the Falashas or the Ethiopian Jews got there historically?
First of all, we've had a discussion before about the use of the word Falashas. The Falashas, meaning the forgotten, is considered a pejorative term by the Ethiopian Jews. They call themselves the Beta Yisrael, the House of Israel.
So they don't call themselves Falashas?
No, they do not call themselves Falashas. About 2,500 years ago, a group of Israelites separated themselves from the mainstream of Judaism and either came over with King Solomon during his courtship of the Queen of Sheba, or else migrated through Egypt, south through the Sudan into Ethiopia. But this group of Jews were totally cut off from the mainstream of Judaism. As late as 1900, they thought they were the only Jews left on earth. They left Israel before the Talmud. They don't have a Talmud. They left before Hanukkah. They don't have Hanukkah. They left before Purim. They don't celebrate Purim. However, they celebrate Rosh Hashanah. They celebrate Yom Kippur.
I'm going to have to interrupt you now. We have to take a break. We'll be back. We'll continue with a little bit more about the history of the Ethiopian Jews, as I stand corrected, so that we can finish a little bit of that story, and we'll continue in just a very few seconds, and we'll break now for just a few minutes.
Dr. A.M. Chakrabarty is a microbiologist at the University of Illinois College of Medicine and a grantee of the March of Dimes. He has developed a microorganism that eats up herbicides in soil, suspected of causing birth defects. It leaves the soil clean and free again to nurture living things. Research is top priority in the March of Dimes fight against birth defects.
Support the March of Dimes.
Every day in New Jersey, 9 more children are missing, adding to the nearly 2 million children throughout the United States that have disappeared. If you've seen one of these children, please call this toll-free number for the nonprofit organization Child Find. It's 1-800-431-5005. Suburban Cablevision, along with Child Find, wants to help locate missing children, but we can't do it without your help. So please call this number, 1-800-431-5005, to report a missing child.
Okay, no, that's fine.
Often it's a matter of life or death for these children. Please help us out.
When you mail a UNICEF greeting card, it goes to 2 different people, your Aunt Lucy and to a child in another country who needs help. Healthcare, nutritious food, education. It's as if I split the card in 2 and each person receives half. UNICEF greeting cards have 2 destinations. Oh, I know Aunt Lucy well. I'm sure she'll understand.
Call 800-228-1666 for the nearest UNICEF outlet.
Okay, welcome back to our special presentation, Journey to Ethiopia, and rather than say Falashas this time, we'll say the Ethiopian Jews. You were talking, Dave Ravich, about a little bit of the history of the Ethiopian Jews, how they got there. Would you just give us a little more of that?
Historians say that in the 13th or 14th century, there may have been as many as 600,000 to 700,000 Ethiopian Jews that were killed off in various wars in the 15 and 1600s. In 1980, no counts are accurate. There is no census, but they felt that there were approximately 25,000 Jews in Ethiopia. And that count seems to be pretty accurate. About 6,000 or 7,000 Ethiopian Jews are now situated in Israel, and there may be another 6,000 or 7,000 in Ethiopia, and the remainder are in the refugee camps in the Sudan.
Okay, we have some photographs that Dave and Elaine Ravich have brought back from their visit, and we'd like to show a few of these photographs while we're talking about some of the things that describe what life is like among the Ethiopian Jews today. Elaine, what are the villages and homes like? What is the kind of home that an Ethiopian family would be in?
As far a cry from central New Jersey as you want to get. Number one, they are far off the access roads, and in order to get to them, you must walk, climb, scramble, up, down rocks for approximately 1.5 miles to 2 miles to get to the villages.
I think that first photograph that we can put on the screen now shows basically what that looked like. Now, this was the approach to one of the villages that you were coming to?
This was the approach to one of the villages. And as best as it could, that picture did show walking, and it shows walking at a very mild incline, but at some points the incline became very steep, either up or down. When you finally did get to the village, and don't forget, we are 10,000 to 12,000 feet above sea level at that point. They, of course, are used to that rarefied atmosphere. We were not. The villages are very sparse. There may be 10 or 12 huts. The hut is called a tukul. That is an Ethiopian word. It's a tukul. It is a round hut, perhaps 10 or 12 feet in diameter, perhaps 8 feet high with a conical roof, made out of dried dung. Dung seems to be the staple that they use for their homes, for their furniture, if you want to call it that, because they make benches.
What kind of temperature ranges do they have to deal with in those homes?
I understand in the winter, we were there, of course it was November. We were there in shirt sleeves. During the daytime it was fine. At nighttime it gets cold. There is a fire on the floor, very, very primitive, prehistoric almost, the same as 2,500 years ago, as David has said. It has not changed. Their life always has not changed. There is a portion in the center of the room where there is some dried dung that they use to fire, for heat, for light. They will also, if there are some woods nearby, they will gather in some of the brush and use that, but mainly it is the dung. And that gives off whatever kind of heat that they need. It doesn't get bitter. It really doesn't get bitter there.
Mm-hmm. So it never really gets, let's say, below freezing or anything like that?
No, I don't think so.
Nothing like snow or anything like that? Okay.
No.
The next photograph that we have is a photograph of some of the things that you brought that Dave mentioned in terms of the vitamins and the medications. If we can show that second, no, can we show the second photograph? That's it. That second photograph, we can see just on the lower right-hand corner, there are some things on the table, if you will. And those are some of the vitamins and medications that you did bring.
That's right.
Okay. Were they prepared for that kind of stuff? Did they know what it was? Were they familiar with what you were bringing?
We had an interpreter with us, and there was someone, the head of the clinic, and there was a doctor. There were doctors with us. The doctors explained to our interpreter, who then in turn explained to the fellow there. He did seem to know what vitamins were, what calcium was used for, so that we were confident that it was going to be used correctly.
So there was some kind of training in terms of the...
Yes.
Okay.
There were charts, a few basic charts on the walls, which showed that they had some knowledge of what medicine was.
The third photograph that we'd like to go to now is the outside of the synagogue that you visited. Could you tell us a little bit about what that was like?
Well, the synagogue is just
A little
another...
different than the synagogues we know.
Very, very much different. It was another tukul. And we were in several villages, actually 5 to be exact, and sometimes the synagogue was square, most often it was round. The only way you could really tell from the outside that it was the synagogue was that the people would bring you there, number one, and there was a mezuzah on the door.
I think we should explain what a mezuzah is.
A mezuzah is a parchment, the scroll, that is tightly wound in minute print and put into a casing of many different types, perhaps 3 inches, or, small, and affixed to the doorpost of the home or of the synagogue or wherever someone happens to reside.
Actually, the mezuzah is not something that's part of their tradition,
no,
but they have put on
by Westerners.
recently.
It was brought by Westerners. Inside the synagogue, their own scrolls, their own Bible, their own Torah is not in a scroll. There were some scrolls there that were brought by Westerners since 90 years ago, since they were opened up to the world and knew that there were other Jews and other Jews knew that they were there.
What is the form of their Bible?
A book. It's a book, and it's written in ancient Ethiopic language, which is not a spoken language at all. Ethiopians or not do not speak this language and never have. But it's called Ge'ez. G-E with an apostrophe E-Z. And that is the language. The priests only can read this. And in the synagogue, it was really delightful. This one particular synagogue, the first village we went to, there were some chairs and a bench along one side, and young children being taught, apparently, by the teacher, by the priest. And they got a little out of hand, as young children will do. And he curbed them very quickly. Very quickly, he sat them down and he curbed them. And with us, there was also this young girl interpreter, and she had been there before. And she smoothed their feelings over because they were very hurt that they were chastised in front of us.
We'll get to see a little bit more and talk a little bit more about the children. There is another, the next fourth photograph shows the inside of the synagogue.
Now, the synagogue should really have, as I say, it's really no different than any of the other tukuls, but it should have 2 parts to it. One part where the Holy of Holies is kept, and the other part where anybody can go. In the synagogue, that first synagogue that we went to, there didn't seem to be that kind of partition. However, we were told by this translator that that is usually the case, that there is divided.
Could you tell us a little bit about what life is like for the, let's say, the child? And I think we can go to one of the next photographs. I think we can show can we go to the next photograph, please? That's it. That's the outside of a home, I gather?
Yes, a tukul.
A tukul.
Very typical, very typical. Life